The silence aboard the Vigilant Echo was deafening, broken only by the hum of its failing engines and the occasional soft chirp of an overtaxed control console. Captain Jakor stood at the center of the bridge, his crested feathers dull and sagging, an unspoken reflection of the crew's morale. Beyond the viewport, the stars hung cold and indifferent, while the faint flickering glow of distant battlefields reminded them of how much had been lost. A war that once seemed winnable had turned into a rout. The Cravathi Empire, with their relentless efficiency and implacable hunger for domination, had torn through Paxan defenses like a flame through dry leaves. For centuries, the Paxan alliance had stood firm against the occasional marauding force or opportunistic invader. But the Cravathi were something different, patient, calculating, and disturbingly thorough. They had studied the alliance's tactics, exploited its internal divisions, and struck at just the right moment. World after world had fallen, and now, Paxan Prime itself, the beating heart of the alliance, was under siege. Jakor reviewed the latest tactical data on his console. It was a grim litany. Dwindling fleet numbers, shattered supply lines, and the persistent, mocking presence of the Cravathi blockade. The enemy ships were organized in tight formations, their advanced shielding systems shimmering as they maintained a stranglehold on the system. The Cravathi didn't just conquer. They savored the slow, inevitable collapse of their foes. Captain, his comms officer, a small reptilian Kren, spoke hesitantly. "We've intercepted a Cravathi broadcast. It's a victory declaration." Jakor stiffened. "Victory? They haven't taken Paxan Prime." "Not yet, sir, but they're celebrating as if they already have. It's as if they know the last of our reinforcements won't make it through. They've started their victory festival." The words hit like a physical blow. The Cravathi victory festivals were infamous. Not content with simply conquering, they would broadcast their triumphs across the galaxy, forcing their defeated enemies to watch their own humiliation. It was psychological warfare at its most ruthless. For the Alliance, the knowledge that the Cravathi were already rejoicing was a crushing reminder of how desperate their situation had become. Jakor slumped back in his command chair, his talons tapping absently against the armrest. His crew watched him, their eyes filled with the unspoken plea for guidance, for hope. But what hope could he offer them now? The captain's mind raced. Their fleet was too fragmented to mount a counterattack. Even if they rallied the remaining ships, they would be outgunned and outmaneuvered. Diplomacy had long since failed. There was no reasoning with the Cravathi. Surrender would mean the end of the alliance, the end of everything they had fought to protect. And then a thought occurred. It was a mad, desperate idea, one that he immediately tried to dismiss. But as the weight of their situation pressed down on him, the thought refused to go away. The humans, humanity, that unruly, unpredictable species that had once been part of the galactic community, before their exile to the galactic fringe, they had always been a problem. Too headstrong, too chaotic, too human. The Alliance had banished them decades ago, after countless diplomatic incidents, technological disruptions, and cultural clashes. No one had spoken to them since. But the humans had always been resourceful, unorthodox. The stories of their feats, some legendary, some horrifying, still lingered in the shared consciousness of the galaxy. And if anyone could turn the tide against the Cravathi, it might just be them. "Comms," Jakor said suddenly, his voice sharper than intended. "Establish a link using the old human protocols. I know we have them in the archives." The Kren officer blinked, his crest flushing a pale green. "Sir, the human protocols? You mean the ones we're—" "Yes," Jakor interrupted. "Those. Use them. Now." A murmur spread across the bridge. No one openly questioned their captain. But the tension in the room thickened. The human protocols hadn't been touched in over a century. No one even knew if they still worked or if the humans would even answer. And if they did, what then? The humans were as much a mystery now as they had been before their banishment. Jakor ignored the unease. He was out of options. With a grim determination, He leaned forward, staring at the console as his comms officer worked. The transmission was sent into the void, a beacon of desperation hurled into the unknown. And then they waited. The first signal came just a few hours after the Vigilant Echo's transmission. At first it was no more than faint static, a crackle in the void that might have been anything. But then, a voice broke through. "This is Captain Marie Hart of the Terran vessel Retribution's Fire. Your message reached us loud and clear. Send your coordinates." Jakor nearly dropped his datapad. He scrambled to open the channel, his voice tight with both shock and urgency. "This is Captain Jakor of the Paxson Alliance scout ship Vigilant Echo. I'm sending coordinates now." His talons tapped quickly over the console as he transmitted their location. The crew stood frozen, their feathers and scales ruffled. With uncertainty, the voice returned, clearer now, calm and steady. "Coordinates received. We're on our way." And just like that, the channel went silent. Jakor stared at the darkened console, his mind racing. He had expected... What had he expected? He wasn't sure. Perhaps anger, questions, maybe even the refusal to help. Instead, the human captain had responded almost immediately without hesitation. But who was this Captain Hart? And what kind of ship was the Retribution's Fire? The bridge crew turned to Jakor, their expressions a mixture of curiosity and worry. None of them had ever heard a human voice before, not in person, not over comms, not even in old archives. Humanity had been absent from the galactic stage for longer than most of them had been alive. They had only stories to go on, tales of reckless, stubborn beings who seemed to thrive on chaos. The prospect of their return filled the room with an electric tension. The hours dragged on. The Vigilant Echo's scanners remained focused on the surrounding space, but the Cravathi blockade continued its methodical tightening around Paxson Prime. Jakor tried not to think about what would happen if the humans didn't arrive in time or didn't arrive at all. Finally, the sensors lit up. A new contact, moving fast, coming straight toward them. The bridge erupted into activity as every crew member scrambled to analyze the incoming signature. When the ship appeared on the view screen, even Jakor couldn't hide his astonishment. The Retribution's Fire was enormous. Its silhouette bristled with weaponry, the kind of arsenal that looked designed for one thing: destruction. The hull was unlike any Paxson or Cravathi ship, jagged and uneven, as though its construction had been more about raw function than aesthetic unity. Despite its rough appearance, the vessel radiated a kind of brutal efficiency. This was not a warship that had been built by committee or crafted with elegance in mind. It was a predator. Jakor took a steadying breath and opened the comms channel. "Captain Hart, this is Captain Jakor. We see you on our scanners." Her reply was immediate. "Good, now tell me exactly what we're dealing with." Jakor quickly explained the Cravathi blockade, their numbers, their formation, and their advanced shielding technology. He described the state of the Paxson Alliance, scattered, desperate, and on the brink of collapse. When he finished, there was a long pause. "Sounds like a real mess," Hart said finally. Her voice carried a calm, almost casual confidence that unsettled Jakor. "But I've seen worse. Sit tight and be ready. We'll take care of this." Jakor wasn't sure how to respond. He tried to mask his skepticism. "You'll take care of this? Just watch. And tell your people to hold the line a little longer." The comm channel closed. Jakor stared at the blank screen, a mix of hope and doubt swirling inside him. He had called for help and the humans had answered, but what could one ship do against a Cravathi armada? Moments later, the Retribution's Fire moved into position. Then something remarkable happened. Dozens of smaller contacts blinked into existence around it. Ships of various shapes and sizes, each one stranger than the last, emerged from hyperspace. Some were cobbled together from mismatched parts. Others looked sleek and experimental. The fleet was as motley as its human origins. It was clear that this was no unified military force. These were privateers, mercenaries, scavengers, and outlaws. Somehow, Captain Hart had rallied them to a cause. Jakor's feathers twitched in amazement. The humans weren't coming as saviors from a distant golden age. They were coming as something far more dangerous. A band of rogues who fought not out of loyalty or duty but because they chose to. And in that moment, he dared to believe they might just be enough. For decades, the Paxans had fought the Cravathi in predictable patterns, rigid formations, hierarchical command structures, and standardized tactics. The Cravathi had anticipated every move, breaking apart fleet after fleet with cold efficiency. The arrival of the human fleet, however, changed everything. As the motley collection of human vessels descended on the Cravathi blockade, chaos erupted. The Cravathi had prepared for a traditional battlefront, but not for this. The humans attacked. In a disorganized yet strangely coordinated frenzy, ships appeared from unexpected angles, swooping in to strike key targets before disappearing back into the darkness. Drones turned on their masters as human engineers hacked into Cravathi control systems. The humans used weapons and tactics that defied conventional logic, electromagnetic pulses that knocked out shields in brief, devastating bursts, experimental missiles that scattered into swarms of smaller projectiles, overwhelming enemy point defenses. The Retribution's fire led the charge. Captain Marie Hart's voice, calm yet commanding, echoed across the human comm channels. She gave no long-winded speeches, no rousing calls to arms. Instead, she delivered short, clipped orders that her ragtag fleet followed without question. Even though her ships were from a dozen different factions, and even though they lacked the uniformity of the Cravathi armada, the humans fought with an uncanny synergy. On board the vigilant Echo, Captain Jakor and his crew watched in awe as the battle unfolded. It was like nothing they had ever seen. The humans didn't follow any pattern that the Paxans or Cravathi had studied. They seemed to rely on instinct, improvisation, and an almost reckless willingness to put themselves in harm's way. At first, Jakor thought it was chaos, but the longer he observed, the more he realized there was a strange order to it. The humans had learned to turn their lack of a rigid hierarchy into a strength. If one ship fell, another took its place. If one tactic failed, they adapted immediately, using a completely different approach without hesitation. The Cravathi were slow to respond. Their central command structure, once their greatest strength, now became their greatest weakness. While their fleet commanders deliberated over new strategies, the humans continued their relentless assault. Key Cravathi cruisers were disabled before they could reposition. Supply ships were destroyed, cutting off the armada's access to ammunition and fuel. Even the vaunted Cravathi capital ships, with their advanced shielding systems, proved vulnerable to the humans' unorthodox methods. No one had ever dared to approach the Cravathi with such reckless aggression, and it worked. As the battle stretched into its second week, the Cravathi celebrations turned into frantic calls for reinforcements. Their broadcasts, once filled with arrogant proclamations of victory, now carried tones of desperation. The galaxy, watching from a distance, began to murmur with disbelief. The unstoppable Cravathi armada, the conquerors of so many worlds, was being driven back. The Paxans, still scattered and battered, found new hope. Inspired by the humans' boldness, they began to regroup and re-enter the fight. Jakor coordinated with other Paxan captains, rallying what remained of their forces. They joined the humans in targeting the Cravathi's supply lines and exploiting the gaps that opened in their once impenetrable formations. "Captain," said Jakor's comms officer one day, "the humans are broadcasting something on a wide frequency." Jakor furrowed his brow. "Put it on." The voice of Captain Hart came through, calm and steady as always. "To all Paxan Alliance forces, the Cravathi are breaking. Keep pushing. You've got them on the run. We'll handle their heavy hitters. Just make sure you keep those supply fruits secure. We're not stopping until they're gone." It wasn't a plea or a rallying cry. It was a simple, clear directive, the kind of statement that carried weight not because of its words, but because of the actions behind them. The Paxan officers exchanged looks, their feathers fluffing with newfound resolve. Jakor leaned back in his command chair, his talons tapping thoughtfully. For the first time in months, he allowed himself a flicker of hope. The Cravathi had always believed they were untouchable. Their arrogance had led them to underestimate the humans, a mistake that was now costing them dearly. The Cravathi armada continued to fragment. Some ships fled the battlefield entirely, unwilling to face the relentless human assault. Others were simply obliterated by a sudden, unexpected strike. The tide had turned, and as Jakor watched the once imposing Cravathi blockade crumble, he realized that this wasn't just a military victory, it was something far more profound. The galaxy had always dismissed humanity as a dangerous, chaotic anomaly, but here they were, proving that their defiance, their adaptability, and their sheer audacity could outmatch even the most disciplined and powerful empire. It was a turning point, not just for the war, but for the way the galaxy viewed the humans, who had been exiled to the fringes. The Cravathi were no longer celebrating, they were retreating, and the humans were still advancing. The Cravathi's retreat was not orderly. It was a panicked, scrambling withdrawal, ships crashing into one another as they fled. For the first time in centuries, the galaxy's most disciplined military force was in disarray. The humans didn't let up. They pursued their quarry like predators who had tasted blood, hammering the Cravathi with continuous strikes. When the remnants of the enemy fleet tried to regroup near their forward staging point, the Retribution's fire and its allies were already there, waiting. "Hit them hard and don't let them breathe," Captain Hart ordered over comms. "Every cruiser we take out now is one less ship they can use to regroup." The battle that followed wasn't even close. The Cravathi formations, once models of precision, fell apart under the relentless onslaught. The humans pressed every advantage, their ships darting in and out of combat like wolves among a herd of panicked prey. The final blow came when a human dreadnought, a behemoth of a ship cobbled together from scavenged parts but armed with a devastating array of particle cannons, unleashed its full arsenal. The Cravathi flagship, the symbol of their invincibility, crumpled under the bombardment and exploded into a blinding flash of light. Across the bridge of the Vigilant Echo, cheers erupted. Even Captain Jakor, who had prided himself on maintaining composure, felt his feathers lift in exhilaration. The Cravathi fleet was broken. Their blockade was shattered. For the first time since the war began, the Paxans saw a future beyond survival. As the dust settled, Captain Hart hailed the Vigilant Echo. Her face appeared on the screen, human features marked by lines of experience, her steady gaze holding the weight of command. "Captain Jakor," she said, her voice as calm as it had been when she first responded to his distress call. "I believe that's what you might call a decisive victory." Jakor inclined his feathered head. "Captain Hart, we owe you more than I can express. The entire alliance does. We would not have survived without your intervention." Hart shook her head. "This isn't about debt. We came because it needed to be done. But now it's up to you to rebuild and make sure the Cravathi can't pull this stunt again." The words carried a simple authority. Jakor understood. The humans weren't here to dominate, to demand tribute, or to stay and oversee the Paxans' recovery. They had come to fight the threat, and now that it was neutralized, they were ready to move on. "Still," Jakor said, "we must offer something in return. Please, let us—" "You don't need to offer us anything," Hart interrupted. "But if you ever need us again, well, you know how to reach us." A hint of a smile crossed her face before the screen went dark. The humans didn't linger. The Retribution's fire and its strange fleet of pirates, mercenaries, and renegades dispersed as quickly as they had appeared. Some jumped into hyperspace immediately, vanishing into the stars. Others lingered just long enough to collect their spoils before setting course for distant corners of the galaxy. In mere hours, the human fleet was gone, leaving only the wreckage of Cravathi ships and a stunned Paxan alliance behind. In the days that followed, the Paxans regrouped. Under Jakor's leadership, they started rebuilding their shattered fleets, repairing their broken defenses and reaching out to allies who had grown distant in the face of the Cravathi threat. The alliance's morale, once on the verge of collapse, now surged with new determination. Their enemies were not invincible, and their greatest ally was not the one they had expected. The Cravathi, meanwhile, retreated to their core worlds. Their aura of dominance shattered. Their victory celebrations had turned into desperate attempts to maintain control over their own territories. Other species, once too afraid to resist, began to rise up against them, emboldened by their defeat at the hands of the humans. The Cravathi would never regain their former strength. The galaxy was forever changed. The Paxans had been humbled, the Cravathi had been brought low, and the humans, once thought of as little more than an unruly nuisance, had proven that they were still a force to be reckoned with. Their methods were unconventional, their motivations unclear, but their effectiveness was undeniable. Stories of the battle would spread across the stars, whispered in corridors of power and shouted in taverns on remote colonies. For the first time in over a century, the galaxy was reminded that humanity, unpredictable and formidable, was still out there. As the vigilant Echo prepared to depart the now liberated Paxan Prime, Jakor stood on the bridge, gazing out at the debris field that had once been a Cravathi fleet. He thought of the humans, not as saviors, not as villains, but as something else entirely. Allies, perhaps. Or maybe just a reminder that the galaxy was larger and more complex than the Alliance had allowed itself to believe. "Set course for the nearest repair station," Jakor said at last. "We have a lot of work ahead of us." The stars shifted as the ship turned, and Captain Jakor allowed himself a moment of quiet reflection. Their enemies had been celebrating victory, confident that all was lost for the Alliance. They hadn't expected humanity to answer the call. Now the galaxy would remember. Humans were not so easily dismissed, and the Cravathi would never forget.